like your thing.
It's working now.
Welcome everyone to Après Midi, and I am so pleased to introduce Mr. David Downie. Would you please stand up?
Oh, I'm sitting on the microphone.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
And the camera can't see you if you're sitting down either.
How can it see me?
I think so.
My
You can see you
towering
now.
height is a true American.
Okay. So David, happens to be one of our regular speakers. I think you have come and spoken almost every year, at least every time you have a new book, which is, I don't know, very often.
It's, yeah, a number of times. But the first time was at Chez Genie
Very long time ago.
20 years ago.
Yeah, could be.
Something.
Could be. And how many books do you have?
I think this is the 18th or 19th. I've lost track.
Wow. Thank you. 19th. There you go.
That's a fan, a true fan.
And you've read every single
And I'm
one
not
of them,
talking
I'm
about
sure
a
of it.
ventilator.
I'm going to let you talk about yourself.
Myself?
Yourself and your books.
Oh.
And your newest book, which is
The newest one is
Roman Roulette. Okay.
I'd rather you talked about yourself or I talked about you.
No, we're not going to do any of those things.
Okay.
We're going to let you do your thing.
All
Okay.
right. Okay.
Thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
Let's have
Thank you,
a round of applause.
I'm applauding all of you because it's a cold day and you've come from afar probably, like me. I got up at 4 this morning and drove cross country and got on a train to come back to Paris to see.
You from Italy this morning?
No, I was in Burgundy.
Oh, okay, that's not quite as far.
In fact, stop the whiskey, bring on the Burgundy. Sorry. How many of you here are from San Francisco? Let's see a showing of hands.
A lot.
I don't have my glasses on, but quite a few. For a relatively small city, I'd say that's a pretty good showing.
Does it count if you've lived there?
Sure.
Okay.
There you go. So why didn't you come to my book event in San Francisco last month?
Because we live here now.
Oh, okay. Well, good to see you. Sort of. You're all in a blur, but that's okay. Daria Vinci is my fictional heroine, as you probably know. Actually, let me ask you this. Has anyone here, other than, oh, thank you. Good Lord. Cheers. I know this young lady here read Rivera, and my wife read Rivera. Has anyone else other than Adrian read Rivera? Oh, yeah. Huh? Okay. Well,
I read Red Riviera sitting on the Riviera.
Oh, good. That sounds like a modernist poem.
It was perfect.
So I ran out of Red Riviera copies. This is what that book jacket looked like, and I introduced Daria Vinci, my detective, in Red Riviera, and Roman Roulette is the second episode. They're all standalones. You can read them independently. However, there is a kind of progression, if you will, in that Daria Vinci is a kind of troublemaker. She actually believes in the rule of law, and she's straight, meaning she's not corrupt, and she gets in trouble for that, as police officers sometimes do. In Red Riviera, she is involved with a nest of fascist conspirators who are, guess what, planning a coup attempt. Now, I wrote that before January 6th. Or what happened last week in Germany that I'm sure all of you read about. Does everyone know what happened in Germany last week with the coup attempt? It was quite something. Allison spotted that on BBC and sent it to me, and I read it and I said, damn, they read Red Riviera. So,
It's your fault.
but then I realized that actually they must have read Roman roulette, because the coup and the theme of a coup continues in part 2. This, by the way, is for you, Adrian. You better take
Oh, thank you.
it.
Yay.
So I think that you could call these political thrillers, but I wouldn't want to scare anyone away because they're entertaining. There are little pills of history and culture that are dropped in, but I think they're fairly painless to swallow. And since we seem to have an abundance of coup d'etat these days, I thought it would be interesting to go back in time to the time of Julius Caesar, because all of these things are connected, believe it or not. So all of you know about Julius Caesar, right? The Ides of March.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a nephew of mine who is about 30 or 31 now and is very bright. He works at the Livermore Lab in California, super brain kind of guy. And he visited us. We took him to Rome. And I said, now, Charlie, you know who Julius Caesar was, right? And he says, yeah, he was some kind of general, wasn't he? I said, yeah, he was some kind of general, all right. So Julius Caesar was a brilliant tactician and military man and an able statesman. He was a charmer. He got up in the forum and spoke to everyone. And he became extremely dangerous because he had too many successes. And he got what people used to call the big head, if you remember that old expression.
La
So,
grosse tête.
yeah, but I used to hear people in California when I was a kid saying, oh, he's got the big head, meaning he was full of himself, overconfident, swaggering. So he started to do all the things that an Elon Musk would do today, or a Trump. And he got a lot of people riled up against him, and a very powerful faction decided that they kind of liked the notion of an oligarchic gerontocracy that was calling itself a republic. But in any case, they decided that they didn't like the idea of the imperator having imperium in Italy as well, because what we all forget is that Caesar was given the title imperator, but he could only use it when he was outside of Italy. So he decided that he really liked being the imperator, which was the highest. It was way above dictator and so forth. And so the coup plotters decide that they're going to get him on the Ides of March. That's the 15th of March. And there were 27 of them. And he was stabbed by each and every one of them. However, it was probably Brutus's blow that really did him in, because afterwards it was remarked that a lot of the blows were very superficial, like they just had to show everyone that they were part of the group, and they went up and they kind of went, eh, and then jumped back. But he died nevertheless, as we know. And guess who was absolutely fascinated by Julius Caesar and wrote a life of Julius Caesar? You will never guess.
Your nephew.
That's a good one. No, you'll never guess, but it's actually intimately associated with the city that we're in. And he also was an emperor.
Napoleon?
Yes,
No.
but which Napoleon? No. Napoleon le Petit, as Victor Hugo called him. Napoleon III, since there was no Napoleon II, or that is, he never reigned. He died before he could ever reign. So Napoleon III was deeply inspired by Caesar. Okay? He studies everything in Caesar's life, and in December of 1851, he and his 5 co-conspirators organize what has gone down as the perfect model coup attempt, which succeeded. Now, if you go down the ages, all the way through the shambolic January 6th to what just happened in Germany, to my books, all of this is modeled in a way on what Napoleon III did, which was absolutely appalling because he had thousands of people killed and I think 10,000 deported. He took over all the newspapers. Now he was very clever because he had men, not women, running things. He had spies everywhere and people who were willing to take over for him and do what Trump tried to do. So with that background, you now know that my heroine, Daria Vinci, gets wind of something similar in Red Riviera. Okay? It starts out with a kind of outlandish beginning, and I got grief from some reviewers and people because they said, well, that couldn't happen. That absolutely couldn't happen. But the fact of the matter is that it could happen. And I have been told that it did happen. And what happens in the beginning of Red Riviera is a seaplane, which is outfitted for putting out fires. It's called a Canadair, made in Canada, swoops down and snatches this rather hideous man, and he disappears. And we don't know whether it was an accident, because these seaplanes coming down to pick up water to put out fires on the Riviera, there are canoes, there are people swimming. I mean, it's kind of a madhouse. And so we don't know if he was murdered or whatever. And then, as the subtitle of the book is Murder on the Italian Riviera, it kind of gives things away, but it's I won't go into details because they're all spoilers. In any case, what I will tell you is, if you read the book, persevere, because guess what? A seaplane like that can be modified to scoop things up. And this was the gripe, that that kind of plane could not pick up a human. It could suck up a fish or a dog or a cat if a cat happened to be swimming.
Highly unlikely.
Highly unlikely. However, I'll tell you something. We've seen them at work, and they come right up to you where you are and dive in and suck up the water. They're just amazing. I'll tell you.
I love the name of your guy.
The guy who gets killed?
Gary.
Oh, yeah. His name is Gary Baldi.
Yes.
Well,
exactly.
Okay, the other thing you need to know is that Garibaldi, is a very common name on the Italian Riviera. And so...
all over Nice.
Yeah. There are thousands of them. There's a valley behind the Riviera that's just full of... everybody's a Garibaldi, right? So he's from there, and he changes his name because he winds up in America. And what does he call himself? Garibaldi. Anyway, the book is full of silly things like that that sort of leaven it. So in Red Riviera, Daria gets in trouble because guess what? She figures things out, and together with her aged godfather, they figure out what's happening, and I won't go into details, but so instead of being thanked and promoted for her heroism, she is broken and transferred back to Rome, where she comes from. And that's where we pick her up in Roman roulette. Now, I could do something very cruel and say, will the real Daria Vinci please stand up? And then point to my wife over there in the corner. But she would be mortified, and I can see she's already turned red. But the fact of the matter is that Daria, even though she has dark hair and is half Italian, and Allison is not half Italian, I'm half Italian, there are similarities. But people ask me, where did Daria come from? And I say, well, I've been living with Daria for 36 years. And what almost nobody knows, and I'm sure Allison's going to kick me, is that one of her nicknames when she was young was Tom Ponzi. Now, Tom Ponzi was Tommaso Ponzi, who ran the biggest private detective agency in Italy for many years. So Allison is the one who's intrepid and fearless and goes off, and she's a great interviewer, and she used to come with me when I had real work, paid work doing journalism, and I'd interview people, and she often took pictures, and she'd come with me, and I'd ask some series of banal questions, and then Allison would start in, and they all loved Allison, whoever it was. And so then they start spilling the beans, and she asks them all the right questions, and I always run out of tape. Remember the days of tape? So also, for example, not in any of the, well, in this book, you get to know, A Passion for Paris, you get to know Allison pretty well in here. And in Paris to the Pyrenees, when we walked 1,100 kilometers across France, and this is what the book is about. But in Paris, which is the book that has done best for me over the years, I describe how we go intrepidly into these courtyards and whatnot. And the fact of the matter is, we would go up to the door, the carriage door, and I'd look in and I'd say, oh, we can't go in there, that's private. And Allison would go in, wait, and I'd go in behind her, and then she'd start exploring, and I'd follow behind the whole time going, but we shouldn't be here. And so Allison, in that sense, is the inspiration in part for Daria Vinci, but she's based on many different women I know, and she has a tick when she's talking, and she's thoughtful. She goes like this. And we have an Italian friend from Rome who looks amazingly like Daria Vinci and doesn't behave like her at all, but she does that. And I've known her for about 40 years, and it always fascinated me when she's thinking. She goes. So I put that in the book. So Daria is a Franken character, like most characters in fiction. And I think we're probably all of a generation where we are perfectly okay with political correctness and pronoun preferences and all of that. But I was épinglé by meaning put on the spot by an interviewer who asked me, almost like, how dare you create a woman, a female detective? You're a man.
How dare you?
Well, he didn't say it that way, but that's the way it comes off. And I was really taken aback, because I thought, I went to the Soviet Union a long time ago, and that's the kind of thing that would have happened in the Soviet Union. And I really felt extremely uncomfortable with that, especially because I've always considered myself way left of center and a kind of hedonistic type. So I wanted to say, well, remember what Flaubert, I don't think I have to tell people here who Gustave Flaubert was, right? I did in California. Anyway, he said, Emma Bovary, c'est moi. I am Emma Bovary, or she is me. And so that's the way I feel about Daria Vinci, because even though she's based on these other people, she does have a lot of traits that are a bit like me. Luckily, she doesn't look like me. She's a very good-looking woman.
Okay,
And
but what did he mean by how dare you do that?
well, he didn't say
Says
how
that-
dare
okay,
you. But,
okay, yeah,
Um,
still.
well, the other thing is, I mean, think about it. There are umpteen woman writers who create male detectives.
Sure,
Okay,
right.
so if a writer can no longer create a character of any kind, detective or not, who doesn't correspond to her or him in terms of gender or race or background or something, then we're talking about a very serious impoverishment of literature and culture and just
Exactly.
the world. It's actually very scary. But I have to say that I was just in California for a month doing book events for Roman Roulette, and I was telling some fellow San Franciscans that I was very distressed much of the time, because it's a place that I don't recognize anymore in many ways. There's so much self-censorship and I don't know if fear is the right word, but kind of apprehensiveness that wasn't there when I was younger. I haven't lived there in many years, but we go back all the time. Whenever a book comes out, I go back. So, I was somewhat dismayed by what I found, beyond the absolutely horrendous prices, which were
Shocking. Price of everything's shocking.
shocking. I mean, you go and you buy one oversized courgette, zucchini,
That has no taste whatsoever.
and it's like, that'll be $5, right? I got a takeout coffee from this really hole-in-the-wall cruddy restaurant in San Francisco, $5. Takeout. That wasn't sitting,
No.
and so on. I mean, across the board. $7
Gasoline.
toll to get across a bridge, and no discount if you're a commuter, and so on and so forth, to the point where, and then this thing of the tips. You know, you want to pay. A lot of places don't even want cash, because they're just, they just want your card, and then the thing comes up and it gives you the selection of the tips that go up to 25%. And
And
it's
they start
usually,
at 18.
and it's like self-service. I mean, I go and I say, I'll have the salmon burger, and okay, so then the salmon burger, it says it's $12, but by the time you pay the tax, and then they're
tip.
waiting for the tip, and then you've got to go get it yourself. So what was the tip for? I don't know. I mean, I was a waiter once upon a time in San Francisco 40 years ago.
Things have changed.
Oh my God, terrifying. So,
True.
if people have questions or comments, I mean, you're all so reverent and quiet, it's scary.
We want you to read passages.
Oh no, you want me to read?
Yes.
Okay.
If you
all right.
can, do you mind?
You mean they want to know whether they want to buy the book?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
We want to.
Okay. let me show you what happened to my reading glasses.
Oh, I thought those were those clever glasses that come together. You know, they're magnetized and they stick in the middle. You know, the kind that. Yeah, you wear it around your neck and then you pull it right.
I wish. This is called baggage handler's glasses. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. But. Okay, so I'm going to read you from the beginning of Roman Roulette. How's that?
Okay.
An air raid siren wailed. Cymbals clashed. The gangling rawboned contralto center stage flung out her arms, shouting an operatic recitativo. First the words pealed out in German, then English, Russian, and French. Enunciating alternate notes in a shrill falsetto, she followed each shriek with a vibrating baritone bark. One down, one up, one down, one up. Commissioner Daria Vici's facial muscles had a will of their own. They followed the singer's contrapuntal lament and pumping, flailing arms. The commissioner's remarkably handsome face was transformed from a study in mature Mediterranean majesty into a twitching mask of martyred human agony. Daria could not recall the exact words Maestro Katzenbaum had used to describe his Symphony for a Brave New World, a teeter-totter of contrapuntal sounds and cacophony of emphatic polyglot words meant to evoke postmodern superabundance in the superheated run-up to climate Armageddon. During the intermezzo, she had chatted with the maestro, her brother Mario Vinci, and her aged godfather, Ambassador Willem Bremack. That seemed a lifetime ago. She longed for the concert to be over. Kicking herself for accepting her brother's invitation, she knew she had agreed to appease him and honor the memory of their long-dead father. Dr. Mario Vinci, MD, PhD, etc., etc., was a trustee of the Institute of America in Rome and the host of the annual Midsummer fundraising gala. Their father, Roberto, had also been a trustee decades ago. Her thoughts were interrupted by a ball-peen hammer ringing a gong and a pneumatic hand drill whizzing a wire brush against a towering silver samovar. Groaning out loud, Daria glanced furtively around and rose to her feet. Calculating how long it would take to scoot sideways, then disappear among the fragrant box hedges, the leafy acanthus and topiary laurels bordering the villa's outdoor terrace, she guesstimated 5 embarrassing seconds, a small price to pay. She would incur her brother's wrath. So be it. Ducking and moving along, the cymbals clashed again a few feet from her head. Glancing at her older brother, Daria wondered if Mario had gone deaf. He appeared imperturbable. The semi-retired Manhattan cardiologist, a part-time Rome resident, was 18 years her senior, making him nearly 70. He sat as bolt upright as the electrified upright piano not 5 yards in front of them on the stage. His large black eyes glowed in the Roman sunset. They remained fixed on the musicians. So did the set of his thick, sensual, but unsmiling lips. With a jolt and a violent squeal, the piano shook the front rows of the concert hall just as Daria was slipping by. A trombone and tuba blared as a kettle drum rumbled. It was then that Daria heard the muffled but unmistakable report of a firearm. She froze, dropping into an empty front row seat as if she herself had been shot. A large-bore handgun, she guessed. Listening for the sound of a second gunshot, watching the faces of those seated nearby, she realized no one else had heard anything over the music. Could she be mistaken? Was the shot a car backfiring? Okay.
Wow. Yeah.
So that's how it starts.
Well, so what was the shot?
You gotta read on. So how many in the audience think it was a car backfiring?
Nobody.
Well, I've driven one out already.
I'm looking for it. I'm looking for it.
Anyone
Oh,
else?
He's coming back because he's not leaving his wine for long. Okay.
I'm just needling him. That's what I do. So Daria Vinci has been in Digos, that's D-I-G-O-S, for about 25 years. She's about 50. Digos is the Italian equivalent, roughly, of the FBI. Things are organized differently.
What's it stand for?
D-I-G-O-S.
Yeah.
Directorate of General
Italian?
Invest.
No?
What?
Okay. I was about to say Italian.
Oh, okay. It's
No.
called Direzione Investigazioni Generali e Operazioni Speciali, which means the Directorate or the Bureau of General Investigations and Special Operations. Okay, so it's kind of a scary thing in Italy if somebody comes along, and they're usually plain clothed, and people say, you know,
Like FBI.
Digos. It's just like the FBI.
Right.
And in fact, they handle a lot of the same kinds of things. And they are under the Ministry of the Interior. See, after World War II, when Italy got its modern constitution, which was essentially dictated to them by the victorious Allies, it was set up in such a way that the country would be largely ungovernable. Okay? And it's worked.
I was going to say, exactly. It worked very well.
It's worked. Okay, so it's worked. And Italy has had over 70 governments, okay, since then. Now, what you have to remember is that despite that, it is still the 8th largest economy in the world.
Really?
Yes, ma'am.
Wow.
So it is a very rich and obviously culturally very important and historically unparalleled
And art-wise.
country in art.
Like 80 or 85% of all the art in the world is actually sitting in Italy.
60% of all the
60%.
UNESCO World Heritage Sites are in Italy, in one country.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's an amazing place which can be absolutely exhausting and baffling and frustrating and, you know, wonderful and seductive and everything else at the same time. And so Daria has to deal with the ins and outs of Italian bureaucracy. Now, her Polizia di Stato is under the Ministry of the Interior, right? And then everyone has heard of the Carabinieri, right? Well, the Carabinieri are military. They're part of the military. And they're under the Ministry of Defense. And when you're a Carabinieri, you actually have a military career. And there are rivalries, and it was set up that way so that you wouldn't get another Mussolini, right? But right now we have the closest to a Mussolini than we have had.
No, the woman, yeah, the new. The new.
But what's astonishing about Giorgia Meloni is, well, what astonishes me is that someone who won 26% of those who voted, which was historically low turnout, 60-some%. Italy, you used to vote 98% of the population would vote, because if you didn't vote, you couldn't have a state job. There were many things you couldn't do if you didn't vote. You were obliged to vote. Well, they got rid of all of that, and now it's going down to sort of U.S. levels or French levels. So Meloni got 26%. Okay, so she's ruling the roost. She's the prime minister, and she's got these two baboons with her. Berlusconi, who has been indicted. He's a felon. He's a tax evader. He's molested young ladies, whether they liked it or not. He paid them a lot of money to shut up afterwards, but he's the Trump before Trump, everyone says. And he's an authentic billionaire, unlike Trump, who's in debt to the eyeballs. And currently he's 86 years old. He's gaga. He's been completely rebuilt and remade. So he got 7% of the vote, and Matteo Salvini got 9%. Now, he's even worse than, he's like a nightmare guy. He's like McCarthy and Jim Jordan and Matt Gaetz and Trump rolled into one. And the problem is he's young and vigorous. He also is in the pay of Putin. And this is not me saying it. Everyone knows it. It's been on the front page of Italian newspapers. And Mario Draghi, who is absolutely a straight arrow, and he's had hugely important jobs in banking and European institutions. And he did a fantastic job. In fact, he did such a good job that they ran him out of office. So he said that Salvini is Putin's paid puppet. Il pupazzo prezzolato of Putin. So the 8th largest economy has at its head a woman who is an avowed follower of Mussolini and the fascist way of viewing the world, and then these two ludicrous crooks. So that's the kind of person that my poor detective has to deal with, although she's not dealing directly with them in these books. These are entertainments, right?
Yeah, but it gives you lots of fodder, let's face it.
It does. Of course, I had no idea Meloni would be elected. I couldn't imagine it. No one. So that was like, oh my God.
We could have it here. We could have Marine Le Pen.
Of course. The thing I will say about Meloni is that she's had the fear of God or of somebody, Caesar or somebody, put into her. And so far she's towing the line because Italy realizes that it's part of Europe, and if she really screws up and carries through and does the kinds of things that Marine Le Pen or Jean-Marie Le Pen used to talk about, then Italy would be in such economic straits overnight that she's afraid to do that. So she's backed off on all kinds of stuff. And the average life expectancy of an Italian government is just over 10 months. I'm not making that up.
No, really?
Yeah.
It's really
Yeah. Berlusconi is the only one who had a really
long,
very, very. So if you look at Berlusconi, who was in power for some obscene number of years, that makes it even more impressive, because then you average things out. That means that a lot of the other governments lasted 3 months or 6 months or something. It's pretty crazy. So any questions so far?
She's kind of facing what the trust was the trust from England? who promised all kinds of things and then had to back off everything?
Yeah, but actually Truss was a very poor politician, and Meloni is a very skilled politician. Truss, I think, is not necessarily very bright. She wanted to be a second Margaret Thatcher. She even dressed like her and apparently had a purse made that was just like, you know, idiotic things like that. And she did all the wrong things so quickly that she sank, I mean, in record time. I think no one has ever been prime minister for a shorter time. Meloni isn't like that at all. She's
Imploded, yeah.
yeah, Truss imploded, but Meloni is very smart, and she's very determined. She's very well spoken in her very rough Roman accent, extremely sort of vulgar garbatella working class accent, which is, I guess, in a way refreshing. I watched the ceremony on YouTube when she was sworn in as prime minister, and it was really quite something because she's young. She's 45. I think she'd be the youngest person in this room, except me, of course, because I'm just a kid.
And me.
And you. And she was there in the Quirinale Palace, which is this incredible palace, right? Up on the hill, and she was surrounded by septua and octogenarians, all of them men, all of them with white hair, very white hair, and so I can understand, on the one hand, the desire of the Italians to have an elected government, because what they had was what they call a technical government run by caretakers like Mario Draghi. So they said, we want elections, and this is what they got. And we'll see where it takes them. But no question of denying election results or contesting them or anything like that. This was the will of the people. So 26% of Italian voters, of those who voted her in.
What is the ultimate goal of someone like she? Is it fascism? Is it nationalism? Is it we're becoming tribal around the world?
Globalism.
No, I think she's a populist and a nationalist, much like Marine Le Pen. The idea is it's sort of like, you know, what Marine Le Pen says about France for the French, she would say the same for Italy. It's happening all over the world. In America, you have calls now for industry to be revived and priority to be given to American products and so forth. So she's certainly not a lone voice. I think the scary thing about the extreme right everywhere is the bent towards authoritarianism. And an authoritarian usually comes in and says, okay, let's make France great again. Let's make Italy great again. Let's make America great again, right? They're megalomaniacs. I just invented that.
Daisy, get back to Downie Vinci.
Yes,
Is she working already on a third case?
she is. I don't know if everyone heard. Is Downie Vinci working on a third case? That is a third book in the works. And
Right, that was code for, is there a third book in the works?
yes, and the answer is yes. It's called Venetian Vendetta, Murder in the Lagoon City. And I am working on it now, although I haven't gotten much done on it because I've had way
You're
too
too
many.
busy talking about Roman roulette.
This is the problem. The problem is when any series of books, especially, you get caught up, and then you're caught up trying to set up a book tour, promote a book, and so forth. It takes an enormous amount of time and energy and investment.
Is she modeled after a character you know in Digos, or how do you get your procedural information about how the inner workings of Digos work and all of that sort of thing?
Procedural information. Well, this is not a procedural crime novel, I will say, and I'm sure I made lots of mistakes, but I do read the papers and follow what's going on in Italy, largely thanks to Tom Ponzi, who every day reads I have very bad vision, who reads the newspapers to me, and I listen to the radio, and we have lots of friends. And last year we met a guy who is absolutely fascinating, who is one of the top experts in Italy on terrorism and espionage, counter-espionage. The funniest thing about the encounter was that at the end of it, he said to Allison, "You have the perfect profile for the perfect spy and terrorist." Yeah, because she's sort of beyond suspicion, right? And she speaks multiple languages and moves around and so forth. So he was really interested in, well, also because she's attractive and he was an old goat. But I have a number of friends who are, they're all retired now, recently, carabinieri. And in fact, in Red Riviera, which I have here, I interviewed a couple of times this friend who's a retired carabiniere, and I was always getting information out of him, and then I kind of interviewed him a couple of times before I wrote this. And he's very sort of feisty, and he was throwing out his arms as I talked to him, and he said, "Why do you want to know these things? You journalists and writers, you get everything wrong all the time. And you know what? It's okay, because if you get it right, then nobody likes it, because everybody looks and they say, but that doesn't correspond to what we saw on television or what we read. So why do you want to know the way it really works? You'll just get yourself in trouble." I said, "Oh, yeah, that's probably right." Anyway, I thank him, and I say, to retired carabiniere F, I don't even dare tell you that his first name is Franco, oops, who wisely does not wish his identity to be revealed. He said, because then I said, "Okay, how do you want me to describe you when I thank you in this book?" He said, no, don't thank me, don't identify me. I've told you all these things." So that's where I get a lot of the stuff about the kind of behind the scenes things, like where the special transmitters are and so forth, and the fact that the carabinieri spy on the Polizia di Stato and vice versa. They're constantly listening to each other, which is what the Allies wanted, because what you didn't want was one of the police forces to be able to overwhelm the other. So they're at loggerheads much of the time, and that comes through in this book. The other thing is that I did a double major at UC Berkeley, and then went on to do graduate work in Brown. And one of my majors was political science, and I was always interested in Italy and fascism. My mother was Italian, and I attended the Institute for International Studies in Padua in 1979-80, and it was when the Red Brigades were on trial, and every day when I walked from my room to the university, I passed about 50 tanks and armored vehicles and hundreds of armed police and army people with machine guns and, you know, bulletproof vests and everything. And I saw altercations between the right and the left. And in my course of study at the University of Padua, there were some very lively debates that almost wound up in fist fights between people about politics, because Italy has always been divided like America. Unfortunately, America is coming to look more and more like 1970s Italy. And I just hope that we don't get what the Italians got, which was the years of lead, as they call it, kneecappings and kidnappings and murders. And because the lunatics in America who are perpetrating these imbecilic crimes, they're pretty clumsy, but they're very well armed, which is what scares me. And a lot of them are stupid enough to go out and do really stupid things and dangerous.
They're already
things.
doing a lot of that.
Huh?
They're already doing a lot
Yeah,
of
they
that.
are.
Yeah.
They are. They blew up.
Yeah.
They blew up some big transformers, and so some city in North Carolina or South Carolina. Yeah, yeah. And it's in California too. It turns out they
What brings Downie to Venice?
What brings Daria Vici to Venice? Well, as in Red Riviera, she got in trouble and sent to Rome. In Roman roulette, she gets in trouble and gets sent to Venice.
This is becoming a habit.
Yeah, so there's this place called the Institute of America in Rome, which has absolutely nothing to do, believe me, nothing, absolutely nothing with the American Academy in Rome, where I was a visiting writer for a number of months. Nothing. I didn't model this on that at all.
However,
It's so hard to tell when you're joking.
That's good.
You know, yeah, it's the patch.
It's the delivery. So, yeah, so Daria is visiting this place and something goes on, and we don't know initially whether it's a murder or an accident, but we discover that there are things going on there. And again, it's about an old coup, a coup that failed. I don't know how many of you are familiar with two famous coup plots in Italy, which fizzled, both, luckily. One was called the Piano Solo, and it started at the very top with the president of the Italian Republic in 1964. And it was modeled on Napoleon III's coup. It's very well documented. It started and immediately stopped because the military forces and so forth who were supposed to participate decided they wouldn't. And again, a very similar coup attempt happened in 1970. And you may have heard of the Borghese coup, okay? He, Signor Borghese, can't remember his first name, had been the head of the, what do you call them? The underwater demolition force for the fascists. In other words, they would go out with very primitive underwater aqualungs of the 1940s and put explosives on the keels of ships and things like that. So he was a hero among fascists. And then he, like many fascists, remained in the system. And wound up in a capacity in the military, and he organized this coup with people all over the place, again like the piano solo of '64, and again it fizzled. Now the interesting thing is that connecting these two coups was an organization created by NATO called Gladio in Italy. In English it was called Stay Behind. Here it was called GLEV. In all of the countries of Europe after World War II, when NATO was created, they created these forces to resist a communist takeover or an invasion by the Soviet Union. Okay, it's all very well documented. Now, in Italy, Gladio was infiltrated by two groups. First, the mafia. Everyone knows the mafia because Gladio had NATO armaments and munitions hidden all over the country. And so the mafia, when they wanted explosives and so forth, and machine guns or something, knew where to get them. The other, so that's the Gladio part. The other was P2, the Propaganda Due Secret Masonic Lodge. Well, I'm not making this up. All of this stuff is in Roman roulette. And I'll tell you an anecdote. 40 years ago, I got certified as an interpreter guide for the US State Department. So I did gigs taking Italians around the United States and interpreting. Okay? I was a very low-level guide. I wasn't supposed to go in and meet with the president or the Secretary of State or the Secretary of Defense. That's why when I wound up with the Secretary of Defense and I had to interpret between the Secretary of Defense and this group of Italian left-wing union leaders, I was just like, oh man, I can't handle this shit. I didn't know what, you know. I knew some of the stuff that was going on, but whoa. Okay, so I befriended on this one occasion this high-level Italian center-left union leader, and we became really good friends. I would stay with him afterwards in Italy, and you know, he loved me like I was his son. And this went on for decades. And then he started going a little squirrely to the right, like Elon Musk or something. And one day, maybe 5 years ago, I can't remember, I've got it, I said something to the extent that I thought so-and-so was a corrupt jerk and blah, blah, blah. And my friend, Mauro, stiffened and said, no, you're wrong. He wasn't a jerk or a corrupt asshole. He was a very intelligent man who was behind many very important things that have happened in this country, and he was one of my best friends. And I said, oh, okay, I'm sorry. He was the former,
Foot and mouth disease.
the former prime minister. And then I said, but he belonged to the P2, the secret Masonic Lodge. And my friend said, I'm part of P2.
Uh-oh.
I always have been. So I said, oh my God. Well, I haven't seen him since. But
I wonder why.
very scary. So that winds up in the book. I mean, that was inspired me, these weird things in life that happen to you. So Daria Vici is involved with these people, and this story is really an American and Italian story, because this is the Institute of America in Rome, which has been there for over 100 years. And there are many reasons why the Italian authorities, not to mention the Americans, don't want certain things revealed, and they don't want to know the truth, and it's convenient to them for certain things to either just not be solved, or, you know, it's the usual thing in Italy. You take so long to figure something out that the statute of limitations is over and everybody gets away, like, and that's okay. So unfortunately, Daria is very earnest, though she has a good sense of humor, and she's an avenger type. And so she gets in trouble again. And so how do they get rid of her? Because by the time she's in Rome, the whole thing in Genoa has been revealed, and she's actually now been promoted. And so how do they get rid of her? Well, how do you get rid of somebody in Italy without killing them? You promote them, and you send them somewhere where you think they will never get in your way again. So that's what happens, and she gets sent to Venice. But of course, there she's going to find a really horrible and dreadful and bloody and hideous thing that Joe will love. But many of my readers will read it and they'll go, ew. So that's a very long-winded way of answering your question, Kimmo.
Is deep state something that's grown out of this? All these clandestine things that have happened in different governments, and now people, ordinary people, are saying, look what goes on that we don't know about? Is that the genesis of it, of deep state, of people who, the conspiracy theories and all of that?
I think the conspiracy theories are generally the fruit of diseased and paranoid minds, but the fact of the matter is that there have always been conspiracies. I talked about Caesar. That was a conspiracy. They go back to the beginning of time, and there have been a zillion conspiracies. And secret services have been around for a very long time. And, you know, things do happen in secret. Things are going on all the time under the surface that we don't know about. The deep state, I think, is a very crude notion that these megalomaniacs are trying to take advantage of. But I think that your average Italian, and I mean really average, is convinced that you cannot trust anything that you read in the newspapers or hear, and that the government is constantly working at something under the surface that people don't know about. Unfortunately, I think that's the reality. It's true, and I think it's just as true here in France. Absolutely.
I have a question about writing. Government. It seems like a lot of authors now are writing series, of books, and that seems to be a very popular trend over these past few years. Are you encouraged as a writer to write these series? Do publishers and editors encourage you to do that more so than writing just a singular book and then moving on? Do they sell better? Is that a thing?
Well, no one has ever encouraged me to do anything. I mean, starting way back, people discouraged me and said, finish law school, become a lawyer, don't do this, this is crazy. And they were right. Look at John Grisham. So I've never been asked by a publisher or an editor to write a series. I'm the one who wanted to write this series, and I found a publisher that was willing to publish it. But I think series have always been around.
They have, but they just seem more, there just seems to be more of them.
It could be.
Maybe because things like Kindle bring them to your attention, maybe, I don't know. But I just see more and more of it.
but especially mysteries.
Yeah,
I mean, you develop the characters, and then they have a life. The
Exactly.
characters have a life of their own. They keep going, right?
right. Well, I think that people are used to series on television now, for one thing. But Arthur Conan Doyle was, I think, miffed because he wrote many, many novels that had nothing to do with Sherlock Holmes, and everyone wanted Sherlock Holmes, and he wrote some other series, but they never took off. So all of his life, people kept wanting Sherlock Holmes, and it was like he was very frustrated with the fact that no one would pay attention to what he considered his important standalone novels, and he wrote some very, very good ones. I remember one writer who was writing a series who said that he felt trapped by having to continue to write in a series, and he wanted to kill the protagonist. And one of we've Allison reads to me all the time, and we were reading a lot of P.D. James for a while, and she was a terrifically talented writer. I think a cut above most, and Dalglish was a very good character, but even she, I think, kind of petered out after a while, and they started to become kind of ridiculous. Like the French say that it has to be bien ficelé, the plot. It has to be tied up nicely, so that and sometimes they're not bien ficelé. They're kind of ridiculous. Michael Dibdin, I think, is one of the great underrated mystery or police novel writers. Most people don't even know who he was at this point. He created Aurelio Zen, which was then turned into a BBC mini-series that apparently flopped, I don't know. But he was an extremely good writer. And instead of killing off his inspector killed him. And he died in his 50s from overwork.
Well, Daria is 50 now.
She's about 50. Yeah.
Yeah, so 50 more years before she retires.
God. Well, the interesting thing about books is that you can jump backwards and forwards too. So, for example,
You can always go back in time.
Yeah. So if this series actually takes off, then I could go back, because she's already been in the service for 25
You
years
go to the beginning.
when Red Riviera starts.
Right. You go back to the beginning of her career.
Exactly.
Easy.
Right. Well, she could also change careers, right?
Yeah.
So Alison.
So does anyone have a question, or no more questions?
I'd like to ask you, do you live in Paris still, or do you live somewhere else now?
My
Genoa.
official residence has been Paris since 1986. I spend a lot of time in the countryside now, in Burgundy. I like clean air.
But Genoa also. You're spending a lot of time in Genoa, aren't you?
Yes. And I guess we're going to have to go back to Venice.
Yeah.
One
We'll
of the
do a
things
little research.
I didn't
How terrible.
mention is that my mother's family was essentially Venetian. She was born and brought up in Rome, but there was a family pharmacy in Venice until, I can't remember, 15, 20 years ago. And we went to Venice for the first time in 64 or 65, and they still had the big jars of leeches, which they used. You know, they're very efficient. They're using them again. And I remember going in as a a little boy, and my mother said those are leeches, and they reached in and pulled it. They look like slugs.
Yeah. Well, they are basically, right?
So in 1979, I think it was, or 80, I was cross-registered between Padua and Venice, and I spent several days a week at the University of Venice taking political science courses.
Great place to set up mystery.
Yeah, so I got to know
Great.
it pretty well. But I haven't lived there or spent a lot of time there in quite a long time. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to go back to Venice for a while.
Sounds terrible. Yeah. My heart bleeds for you.
I'm sure.
Or create a series here in Paris.
Well, what I didn't mention is that after Venice, guess where Daria goes on vacation?
Paris.
Paris.
Of course.
And I've already got the title, and I know where the murder occurs. It's called Parisian Peril, Murder in the Marais. So I've lived in the Marais since 1987.
Before it became Le Marais, right?
What's that?
Before it became Le Marais, you know?
Yeah, it was just a rundown, atmospheric part of town that.
When I moved
I love
to this neighborhood 25 years ago, it was so scruffy. This immediate little spot here was not what it is now, that's for sure.
No, and they've
Yeah.
even redone the interior of this cafe.
Oh, yeah, a few times.
Yeah.
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 We've been through three different owners at this cafe.
Well, just wait until we start getting facelifts, and then it's like we've had 3 of them, and we wind up looking like Berlusconi. Okay,
So-
I'm gonna sit down.
Okay,
and-
no, wait,
and-
books.
Anyone who wants to bring me another whiskey, I thank you in advance.
We'll manage that. Books are for sale, right? And you're signing.
Yep.
How much are they?
Special deal, 20 euros a piece.
Okay, now's everybody's opportunity to get a book.
Yeah.
I'm gonna.
I won't wait. Just